The first thing I smelled wasn't my room. My room smells like vanilla candles and the faint, dusty scent of old library books. This air was different. It was cold, sterile, and carried the sharp, expensive bite of sandalwood and ozone. I didn't open my eyes. I couldn't. My eyelids felt like they had been weighted down with lead. I tried to remember the night before. The gala. The champagne that tasted like liquid gold. The way the lights of the city looked like fallen stars through the windows of the Vane estate. And then, the silence. I shifted and the fabric beneath me hissed. Not cotton. The cold, heavy charcoal silk that felt like a snake against my skin. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was rhythmic and metallic. It wasn't a wall clock. It was the sound of a luxury watch, the kind that costs more than a suburban home. It was close. Too close. I forced my eyes open. The ceiling was a vast expanse of dark coffered wood. Shadows stretched long and thin across the room, cast by the gray morning light bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows. I wasn't in my apartment. I was in a fortress. "You're awake," a voice said. The sound didn't come from the door. It came from the foot of the bed. I bolted upright, clutching the silk sheet to my chest. My heart didn't just beat. It slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. Sitting in a high-backed velvet armchair was Julian Vane. He wasn't wearing a robe or pajamas. He was in a full charcoal suit, his tie knotted with surgical precision, his cufflinks gleaming like predators' eyes in the dim light. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. He looked like he had spent the entire night exactly where he was sitting now, watching me. "Where am I?" My voice was a dry rasp. "You're home, Ivy," he said. He didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hands rested on the arms of the chair. "Or, at least, you're home for the next 365 days. The memories rushed back then, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. The contract. My father's gambling debts. The looming foreclosure on our family estate. The only thing I had left of my mother. Julian Vane had appeared like a dark miracle, offering a bridge over the abyss. 1 year of marriage. 1 year of playing the doting wife to the most feared man in the financial world. The contract said separate rooms, I whispered, my eyes darting to the door. Section 4, paragraph 2. We agreed. Julian stood up. He was tall, impossibly so, and as he moved the shadows seemed to follow him. He walked toward the bed with a slow, predatory grace. He didn't stop until he was standing right over me, looking down with eyes that weren't ice-cold, but burning with something I couldn't name. The contract was for the lawyers, Ivy. To make them feel comfortable. He leaned down, placing one hand on the mattress on either side of my hips, pinning me into the silk. But you talk in your sleep. Did you know that? I shook my head, my breath hitching in my throat. The scent of his sandalwood cologne was overwhelming now, wrapping around me like a physical weight. You said my name, he murmured, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous vibration. 3 times. Not with fear. Not with the anger you show me in public. He leaned closer, his lips inches from my ear. You said it like you were searching for me in the dark. I was dreaming, I stammered, trying to shrink away, but the headboard was already against my back. Were you? He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. For a second the mask of the Ice King slipped, and I saw a raw, jagged edge of obsession that terrified me. I've spent 10 years making sure people hear my name and tremble. But the way you said it, it's the only time it's ever sounded like music. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw. His skin was warm, a sharp contrast to his cold demeanor. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him of the legal boundaries we'd drawn in ink. But my body wasn't listening to my brain. This is a business arrangement, Julian, I reminded him, though my voice lacked conviction. Is it? He straightened up, his shadow swallowing the bed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it. He just held it. A billionaire doesn't spend $1 billion on a business arrangement he could get for a fraction of the price. I didn't marry you to save your estate, Ivy. I saved your estate so I could finally have a reason to put a ring on your finger. He set the box on the nightstand and turned toward the door. Breakfast is at 8. Don't be late. My chefs don't like to wait and neither do I. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the handle. He didn't look back. And Ivy? Lock the door tonight if it makes you feel better. But remember, I have the master key to everything in this house. Including you. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silence of the silk and the shadows. I looked at the velvet box on the table, my hand trembling as I reached for it. Inside was a diamond so large it looked heavy, a beautiful, sparkling cage. I realized then that I wasn't just a fake wife. I was a bird that had flown directly into the mouth of a cat that had been waiting a long, long time for the perfect meal. The dress was waiting for me. It was a liquid gold silk that seemed to glow in the dim light of the dressing room, a garment so delicate it looked like it was spun from sunlight and secrets. Along with it was a note written in Julian's sharp, aggressive calligraphy. 7 o'clock. The Grand Hall. Don't wear the pearls. Wear the diamonds I gave you. I stood before the mirror, the weight of the massive diamond on my finger feeling like a lead weight. I looked like a vain. I looked like I belonged in a world of private jets and hostile takeovers. But as I touched the cold stones at my throat, I felt the phantom sensation of Julian's thumb on my jaw from this morning. The Grand Hall was a cathedral of glass and ego. Hundreds of the city's elite were gathered for the annual winter gala, their eyes like hawks. The moment Julian and I appeared at the top of the marble staircase, the room went silent. It wasn't just the prestige, it was the way Julian looked at me. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at his business rivals. He looked at me as if I were the only source of oxygen in a vacuum. "Smile, Ivy," he whispered, his arm winding around my waist. His hand wasn't just resting there. It was pulling me flush against his side, his fingers splayed across my ribs in a grip that felt less like an embrace and more like a claim. "They need to see how happy you are to be mine." "Is that what this is?" I murmured through a practiced porcelain smile. "A show." "Everything is a show," he replied, lead-lining his voice. "Until the curtains close." As we descended, we were immediately swarmed. A prominent hedge fund manager, a man named Sterling who had been trying to buy my family's estate for years, stepped forward. He ignored Julian and looked me up and down with a predatory grin. "Ivy," Sterling said, reaching for my hand. "I was devastated to hear the estate was off the market. I thought we had a deal. I didn't realize you were negotiating elsewhere." Before his fingers could touch my skin, Julian's hand intercepted. He didn't shake Sterling's hand, he crushed it, his knuckles turning white. The air around us suddenly felt like it was charged with high-voltage electricity. "She wasn't negotiating, Sterling," Julian said, his voice dropping into a register that made the ice in the nearby champagne buckets rattle. "She was coming home. And I suggest you keep your hands to yourself before you find your firm under a hostile audit by morning." Sterling blanched, stepping back. I felt a shiver of fear, not of Sterling but of the man standing beside me. Julian wasn't just protective. He was territorial. Throughout the night, the obsession became a physical thing. If I leaned away to speak to a friend, his hand would find the nape of my neck. If I stepped toward the buffet, he was there, his shadow falling over me. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He just monitored my every movement, his eyes dark and dilated. "I need a moment to breathe, Julian," I whispered when we found a small alcove hidden by heavy velvet curtains. "You're suffocating me." "I'm keeping you safe," he countered, stepping into my space until I was backed against the cold stone wall. He placed both hands on the wall on either side of my head, effectively caging me. Safe from what? From people talking to me? From holding my own hand? Julian leaned in, his face inches from mine. The scent of him, wood smoke and power, filled my lungs. Safe from a world that doesn't deserve to look at you. You think I don't see the way they look at you? Like you're a prize to be won? They don't know that the game ended before they even knew it started. "You're acting like you own me," I said, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm against the silk of my dress. "I bought your debts, Ivy. I bought your house. I bought your time," he whispered, his lips grazing my forehead. "But that was the easy part. The hard part is making you realize that you've always belonged to me. Even when you were a child playing in those gardens, even when you were a student oblivious to the man in the black car at the corner. I was there. I have always been there. My breath hitched. What did you say? He didn't answer. He just looked at me with a terrifying, soulful focus. Tonight, the world sees the fake Mrs. Vane. But when we go back to that penthouse and the doors are locked, you'll start to realize there's nothing fake about the way I'm going to love you. He pulled back, his mask of ice sliding back into place as a photographer approached. He tucked my arm back into his grip firm and unyielding. As the flashes went off, blinding and white, I realized the terrifying truth. The contract wasn't a way out for me. It was a way in for him. I wasn't his partner. I was his obsession finally brought within reach. The velvet curtains of the gala felt like a distant memory as the elevator hummed, ascending to the silent heights of the Vane penthouse. Julian hadn't spoken since we left the party. He stood in the corner of the lift, his silhouette sharp against the mirrored brass, his eyes fixed on the floor numbers as they climbed. The door slid open and I stepped out, kicking off my gold heels. The cold marble floor was a relief, but the heavy silence of the apartment felt like a physical weight. Julian walked past me toward his study, his gait steady and mechanical. "I'm going to sleep, Julian," I called out, my voice echoing in the vast empty space. "Sleep well, Ivy," he replied, not looking back. "The house is secure. You don't need to look behind you." But that was the problem. Ever since his comment at the gala, about the black car, about the gardens of my childhood, I couldn't stop looking. I didn't go to my bedroom. Instead, I waited until I heard the heavy thud of his study door closing. I moved like a ghost through the darkened hallways. This penthouse was a labyrinth of glass and shadow, but there was one area I had been explicitly told was off-limits: the north wing. Julian had claimed it was renovations and unstable structural work, but there were no construction crews, no dust and no noise. I reached the heavy windowless door at the end of the corridor. There was no keypad, no biometric scanner, just a simple old-fashioned brass keyhole. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled a small vanity kit from my pocket. My father had taught me a lot of useless things, but how to jiggle a basic tumbler lock with a hairbreadth wire was the one skill that finally felt valuable. The sound felt like a gunshot in the quiet hall. I pushed the door open. It swung on silent hinges, revealing a room that was bathed in a strange, flickering blue light. I stepped inside and forgot how to breathe. This wasn't a room, it was a cathedral of obsession. One wall was covered entirely in floor-to-ceiling monitors. They weren't showing the news or stock tickers. They were live feeds. My bedroom, the bathroom vanity, the kitchen, the garden where I sat every morning. I saw myself just hours ago sitting at my dressing table, completely unaware that I was being watched from the dark. But it was the opposite wall that broke me. It was covered in physical artifacts. A dried pressed flower from my high school graduation bouquet. A coffee cup sleeve with my name scribbled on it from a cafe I used to visit 3 years ago. Hundreds of photographs, none of them posed. Me laughing with a friend in a park. Me crying at my mother's funeral. Me sleeping on a train. I walked toward the center of the room where a single glass display case stood. Inside was a small, tattered red ribbon. My breath caught in a sob. I remembered that ribbon. I'd lost it when I was 7 years old, playing in the woods behind our estate. I had cried for days. "It took me an hour to find it in the brambles," a voice said from the shadows. I screamed, spinning around. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved. Like a collector who had finally shown his prize, the gallery. "You've been following me my whole life," I whispered, backing away until I hit the wall of monitors. On the screen behind me I could see the back of my own head in real time. "Not following," Julian corrected softly, walking toward me. "Protecting. You were always so careless, Ivy. You walked through the world as if it were a kind place. You didn't see the people who wanted to hurt your father, the people who looked at you and saw a target. I made sure they never got close." "You're sick," I choked out, tears blurring my vision. "The contract, the marriage, it was all just a way to lock me in this room, wasn't it?" Julian stopped inches from me. He reached out, not to grab me but to touch the screen showing my face. I tried to stay in the shadows. Truly I did. I thought watching you from a distance would be enough. But then your father started losing the estate. I saw other men like Sterling, circling you. They didn't want to protect you. They wanted to break you. He looked at me then, and the intensity in his eyes was terrifying. It wasn't the look of a husband. It was the look of a man who had replaced his heart with a single, unyielding mission. I didn't bring you here to lock you away, Ivy, he whispered, his hand finally moving from the screen to my cheek. I brought you here so I could finally stop watching through a lens and start watching with my own eyes. You think this room is a prison? Well, the world out there was the prison. Here you're the only thing that matters. I want to leave, I sobbed, pushing against his chest. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the estate. Let me go. Julian's grip tightened on my waist, pulling me into him. His heart was beating with a frantic, wild energy. You can't leave, Ivy. You've seen the North Wing now. You've seen behind the curtain. He leaned down, his lips brushing mine, his voice a dark, possessive promise. You can hate me. You can scream. You can spend every day of this year trying to find a way out. But look at these walls. I've spent 20 years building a world that revolves around you. Do you really think I'm going to let you walk out of it now? He kissed me then, a desperate, bruising thing that tasted of salt and decades of hidden longing. And as the monitors flickered around us, showing a dozen different versions of my life, I realized the most terrifying thing of all. I wasn't just his wife. I was his religion. And Julian Vane was a very, very devoted believer. The kiss ended, but the air remained thick with the electrical hum of the monitors. Julian didn't pull away completely. He kept his forehead pressed against mine, his breath ragged. For a moment, the titan of industry was gone, replaced by a man who seemed to be drowning in his own devotion. You're a monster, I whispered, though my body betrayed me, trembling under his touch. I am whatever I have to be to keep you, he replied. The next few days were a blur of gilded silence. I was no longer allowed to leave the penthouse without Julian. My phone had been replaced with a secure device that only had 3 contacts: Julian, the house staff, and his head of security. I felt like a ghost haunting a palace of glass. I spent my hours in the library trying to find a crack in his armor until I found it, hidden behind a row of first edition classics. It was a file, old and yellowing, with a name I recognized from my childhood: The Vane Sterling Incident. As I read, the blood drained from my face. Julian wasn't just a stalker, he was a survivor. 20 years ago his family and mine had been neighbors. There had been a kidnapping attempt. A plot to take me for ransom. Julian, only a teenager then, had found out. He hadn't told the police. He had gone himself. He had saved me before the men could even move me from the garden, but in the process he had been forced to do something terrible to protect me. My father had covered it up. He had sent Julian away to a strict military academy to keep the mess from touching our family name. My father hadn't protected Julian. He had discarded him. You weren't supposed to find that, Julian's voice came from the doorway. He was leaning there, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, looking older than his years. You saved me, I said, the paper shaking in my hands. And my father threw you away like trash. He didn't want a reminder of how close he came to losing his prize, Julian said, walking into the room. But it didn't matter. In that basement, while I was waiting for the guards to find us, I made a promise. I promised that if I ever got back to you, I would make sure no one, not even your own father, could ever hurt you again. So all of this, is gratitude? I asked, looking around the opulent room that now felt like a high-security bunker. It's necessity, he snapped, his eyes flashing. Bez Sterling is back. The man who organized that kidnapping. He died in prison, but his son, the man you spoke to at the gala, is finishing what his father started. He's the one who bled your father dry. He's the one who waited for the estate to fail so he could claim you. A sudden, sharp chime echoed through the penthouse. It wasn't the doorbell. It was the alarm for the North Wing. Julian's face went pale. He dropped his glass, the crystal shattering on the hardwood. He lunged for his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. Someone is bypassing the secondary encryption. On the monitors, a grainy black and white feed showed a man standing in the hallway outside the north wing door. It was Sterling Jr. He wasn't alone. He had a group of men with him and they weren't carrying briefcases. They were carrying heavy tools. He followed us, I whispered. He knew. He doesn't want the money, Ivy, Julian said, grabbing a hidden drawer beneath the desk and pulling out a sleek black handset. He wants to expose me. He thinks if he shows the world the North Wing, he can have me declared mentally unfit, take over the Vane Empire, and rescue you into his own custody. Julian turned to me, his expression more intense than I had ever seen it. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip almost painful. Listen to me. There is a panic room behind the master suite. Go there. No. Do not come out until you hear my voice and only my voice. What about you? I'm going to finish a conversation that started 20 years ago, he said, his voice dropping into a terrifying guttural growl. As I ran toward the master suite, I heard the heavy thud of the north wing door being kicked in. I heard Sterling's taunting laugh. Come on out, Julian. Let's show the world what's behind door number 1. I reached the master suite, but I didn't go to the panic room. I stopped. I looked at the monitors on the wall. I saw Julian step into the north wing, facing 5 men alone. He didn't look scared. He looked like a man who had finally been given permission to stop pretending to be civilized. I realized then that Julian's obsession wasn't just a cage for me. It was a shield. And if I let Sterling destroy him, I wasn't being rescued. I was being handed over to a real monster. I turned back toward the hallway, grabbing a heavy brass sculpture from the vanity. I wasn't going to hide. If Julian had spent 20 years in the shadows for me, I could spend one night in the light for him. The air in the hallway was thick with the scent of ozone and the heavy rhythmic thud of my own pulse. I didn't go to the panic room. I couldn't. I watched the monitor as Sterling Jr. walked through the north wing, his fingers trailing over the photos of my life with a look of disgusted triumph. Look at this, Sterling laughed, gesturing to the wall of my history. The great Julian Vane is nothing but a common stalker. The board will strip you of everything by sunrise, Julian. And Ivy? She'll be so grateful I saved her that she'll sign the estate over to me by noon. I stepped into the doorway of the north wing just as Julian moved. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He moved like a shadow given form, a blur of charcoal wool and calculated violence. Before Sterling's men could even raise their tools, Julian was among them. It wasn't a fight, it was an extraction. He used the very environment he had built, the heavy glass cases, the reinforced steel frames, to incapacitate them with a cold, terrifying efficiency. But Sterling had a gun. He pulled it from his waistband, his face contorted with panic as his men fell. Stay back. I'll kill you both. No, you won't, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. Sterling spun around, his eyes wide as he saw me standing there, the heavy brass sculpture clutched in my hands. His aim wavered for a fraction of a second, the only window Julian needed. Julian didn't dive for the gun. He dived for me, shielding my body with his own as a shot rang out, shattering one of the monitors behind us. The sound was deafening, followed by the crash of glass. I felt Julian grunt, his weight pressing me back against the doorframe. Then the sound of the penthouse's heavy security doors slamming shut echoed through the hall. Julian's private security had arrived, swarming the room, pinning Sterling to the floor before he could fire again. Silence fell, broken only by the static of the shattered monitor. Julian, I whispered, my hands shaking as I reached for his shoulder. My palms came away wet. Red. Julian, you're hit. He didn't look at the wound. He didn't look at the police now flooding the room. He only looked at me, his eyes searching my face for any sign of injury. Are you hurt? Did he touch you? I'm fine, but you're bleeding. I cried, trying to pull him toward the sofa. He caught my wrists, his grip weak but still possessive. I told you to hide, Ivy. Why didn't you hide? Because you've been hiding from me for 20 years, I said, tears finally spilling over. I didn't want to be a prize anymore, Julian. I wanted to be your wife. The room blurred as the paramedics took him, but he wouldn't let go of my hand until we reached the ambulance. 2 weeks later, the penthouse was quiet again. The north wing had been dismantled, at my request. The monitors were gone, the photographs archived in a private vault, and the shrine was no more. Sterling was behind bars, and the Vane Sterling incident was finally legally closed. I found Julian on the balcony, his shoulder in a sling, looking out at the city skyline. He looked different without the monitors. He looked vulnerable. "The contract ends in 8 months," he said, not turning around. "My lawyers have prepared a settlement. You can take the estate and the money now. The security threat is gone. You don't have to stay." I walked up behind him, sliding my arms around his waist, resting my head against his uninjured shoulder. "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" He stiffened, his breath catching. "I want you to be happy." I realized, lying in that hospital bed, that I was so busy watching you I forgot to let you live. "I don't want to be your cage anymore, Ivy." I pulled back, turning him to face me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the red ribbon, the one he had saved when I was 7. I pressed it into his palm. "You weren't a cage, Julian. You were a lighthouse. I just didn't know how to see the light through the fog." I looked him in the eye, the man who had loved me from the shadows until he nearly burned himself alive. "I'm not staying because of a contract. And I'm not staying because of the money." I took his hand, the one with the wedding band that matched mine, and pressed it to my heart. "I'm staying because for the first time in 20 years, I don't feel like I'm being watched. I feel like I'm being seen." Julian's eyes filled with a raw, overwhelming emotion. He leaned down, his kiss no longer a desperate claim or a dark promise, but something new. It was soft, hesitant, and profoundly real. The fake marriage was over. The obsession had evolved. And as we stood high above the city, I realized that sometimes, the person who follows you into the dark is the only one who can lead you back into the light.